Get off my bus right now. I don't care if you're in uniform, you're nothing but trouble." The businessman's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. The elderly man in the worn military jacket stood quietly, his weathered hands gripping a small duffel bag. "Sir, I just need to get to the VA hospital. My appointment is in 30 minutes. I said get off. Look at you. Probably some homeless faker pretending to be a soldier for sympathy. Real veterans don't look like beggars." The businessman, Marcus Webb, adjusted his expensive suit and pointed toward the bus door. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking away, others pulling out their phones. The old veteran, his name tag reading Thompson, stepped back slowly. "I understand you're upset, but I served this country for 22 years. I just need to get to my medical appointment." 22 years of what? Sitting in some desk job? Real soldiers don't end up looking like street trash. Marcus's voice grew louder, his face red with anger. "Driver, either he gets off or I'm calling the police about this disruption." The bus driver, a middle-aged man named David Rodriguez, watched the scene unfold in his rearview mirror. He'd been driving city routes for 15 years and had seen countless confrontations, but something about this felt different. The old man's quiet dignity in the face of such cruelty stirred something deep within him. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where ordinary moments reveal extraordinary truths about the human spirit. Today we share a story that reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized, carrying burdens we cannot see and displaying courage that inspires us all. Let's uncover what really happened on that Tuesday morning when prejudice met honor and how one man's name would change everything. Marcus Webb had built his reputation on being tough, uncompromising, and always getting his way. As a successful real estate developer, he bulldozed through obstacles and people with equal efficiency. That morning, he was heading to close a deal that would net him millions, and nothing was going to slow him down. He'd noticed the old man when he boarded at the downtown stop. Shabby clothes, worn shoes, that tired look that Marcus associated with failure. When the man had fumbled for exact change, counting out quarters and dimes, Marcus's impatience had turned to disgust. These people, he thought, always making everyone else wait. The confrontation started when the veteran's bag accidentally brushed against Marcus's briefcase as the bus took a sharp turn. That small contact was all Marcus needed to unleash months of pent-up frustration about his struggling business deals and the stress of maintaining his image. "Watch where you're going, old man," Marcus had snapped, pulling his briefcase away dramatically. "Some of us have important places to be." The veteran had apologized immediately, his voice soft and respectful. "Sorry about that, son. These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Something about being called son by this disheveled stranger ignited Marcus's rage. Who was this nobody to address him so familiarly? The disrespect was intolerable. Now, as the confrontation escalated, Marcus felt the eyes of other passengers on him. His reputation for being tough was on the line. He couldn't back down now, especially not to some has-been pretending to be a war hero. "You're holding up honest, hard-working people," Marcus continued his tirade. "Look at yourself. Is this what you call serving your country? Becoming a burden on society?" The veteran's eyes showed a flash of pain, but his voice remained steady. "I've given everything I had to this country, including my health. I'm not asking for special treatment, just basic human decency." "Decency? You want decency? Earn it. Get a job. Stop depending on handouts and sympathy." Marcus stood up, towering over the seated veteran. "Real Americans don't make excuses." The bus fell silent except for the rumble of the engine. Even the usual chatter from teenagers in the back had stopped. Everyone could feel the tension crackling in the air. David Rodriguez had heard enough. As a former military man himself, he recognized something in the old veteran's bearing that Marcus clearly missed. The way the man held himself despite his worn appearance, the quiet strength in his voice, the respect he showed even while being publicly humiliated. But David also knew that bus drivers weren't supposed to get involved in passenger disputes. His job was to drive, not referee. Still, watching this unfold felt wrong on every level. The veteran stood up slowly, his joints protesting after years of hard service and harder living. "I'll get off at the next stop," he said quietly. "I don't want to cause any more trouble." "You should have thought about that before getting on," Marcus shot back. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before inflicting yourself on decent people." As the veteran made his way toward the front of the bus, Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. He'd stood up for himself and shown everyone that he wouldn't be pushed around. The other passengers would remember that Marcus Webb was not a man to be trifled with, but as the old man passed the driver's seat, David Rodriguez saw something that made his blood run cold. The veteran's military ID badge, partially visible through his jacket's clear pocket, caught the light. The name was clearly readable: Thompson J. Colonel, U.S. Army, retired. David's hands began to shake on the steering wheel. He knew that name. Every soldier who'd served in the past 3 decades knew that name. Colonel James Thompson, the hero of Operation Desert Storm, the man who'd saved countless lives during the Battle of Khafji, the officer who'd carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire for 3 straight days. This wasn't just any veteran. This was a living legend, a man whose actions had been studied in military academies, whose courage had inspired a generation of soldiers. And here he was, being humiliated by some businessman who probably couldn't even find Iraq on a map. David pulled the bus over at the next stop, his mind racing. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let a true American hero be treated like garbage by someone who had no idea what real sacrifice looked like. "Excuse me, sir," David called out as Colonel Thompson prepared to step off the bus. "Could you come here for a moment?" The colonel looked confused, but approached the driver's seat. Marcus, still standing in the aisle, watched with irritation. Why was the driver prolonging this? "Could you show me your military ID?" David asked quietly. Colonel Thompson hesitated, then pulled out his identification card. David studied it carefully, comparing the photo to the man standing before him. Despite the years and the hardships written on his face, there was no doubt. "Colonel James Thompson, 1st Armored Division?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, son. That's me." David's eyes filled with tears. He turned to face the passengers, his voice now strong and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to share something with you. This man that just got verbally attacked and humiliated is Colonel James Thompson, one of the greatest heroes in American military history." The bus erupted in murmurs of surprise and confusion. Marcus felt his stomach drop, but he wasn't ready to believe it. "During the Gulf War," David continued, "Colonel Thompson saved over 200 American lives during a 3-day battle. He carried wounded soldiers to safety while under constant enemy fire. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and the Silver Star. He's been featured in documentaries, books, and military training programs." The color drained from Marcus's face. He'd heard of Colonel Thompson, had even seen him in a documentary years ago, but that was a younger man, strong and proud in his dress uniform. This couldn't be the same person. "Sir," David said, turning back to Colonel Thompson, "it would be the greatest honor of my life if you would sit in the front seat. This ride is on me, and I'll make sure you get to your appointment on time." Colonel Thompson's eyes glistened with unshed tears. After so many years of being invisible, of being looked through and looked down upon, someone had seen him for who he truly was. "That's very kind of you, son, but it's not necessary." "It absolutely is necessary," David insisted. "You've earned more respect than I could ever show you in a lifetime." As Colonel Thompson took his seat, David turned his attention to Marcus, who stood frozen in the aisle. "And you, sir, owe this man an apology. Not just for today, but for every time you've judged someone by their appearance instead of their character." Marcus felt the weight of 40 pairs of eyes on him. His throat felt dry, his hands trembling slightly. The confidence he'd felt moments ago had evaporated completely. I didn't know," Marcus stammered. "You didn't want to know," David replied firmly. "You saw an old man in worn clothes and decided he was worthless. You never bothered to look deeper, to consider that maybe those clothes were worn from years of service, that maybe that tired look came from carrying burdens you couldn't imagine." The bus was completely silent now. Even the teenagers in the back were listening intently. "Colonel Thompson," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly, "I owe you the deepest apology. I was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." Colonel Thompson looked up at Marcus with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. "Son, you don't need to apologize to me because I'm a decorated veteran. You need to apologize because I'm a human being who deserved basic respect regardless of my background." Those words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The colonel was right. It shouldn't matter if he was a war hero or a homeless man. Every person deserved to be treated with dignity. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "I've been wrong about so many things, and I'm sorry. Not just to you, but to everyone I've judged unfairly." David resumed driving, but the atmosphere on the bus had completely changed. Passengers began approaching Colonel Thompson, thanking him for his service, sharing their own stories of military family members. One young mother told him about her husband deployed overseas. An elderly woman shared that her brother had served in Vietnam. A college student mentioned that her grandfather had always talked about heroes like Colonel Thompson who'd made his own service possible. Marcus remained standing, watching the outpouring of genuine respect and gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt truly small, not because of his business or his bank account, but because of the poverty of his character. When they reached the VA hospital, Colonel Thompson stood to leave. Marcus stepped forward quickly. "Colonel, please, let me give you my card. I'd like to help however I can. Maybe we could have coffee sometime and you could tell me about your service." Colonel Thompson took the card, studying Marcus's face carefully. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because I've spent so many years thinking I knew what strength looked like, what success meant, what made someone valuable. Today, I learned I was wrong about all of it. I'd like to learn what real strength looks like." "Real strength," Colonel Thompson said softly, "is treating people with kindness, even when they don't deserve it. It's giving respect freely, not because someone has earned it through their achievements, but because they're human. It's standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves." He paused at the bus door, looking back at Marcus. "But most importantly, it's being willing to admit when you're wrong and actually changing, not just feeling sorry." As Colonel Thompson stepped off the bus, applause erupted from the passengers. Not the polite, obligatory clapping you might hear at a ceremony, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation from people who'd witnessed something extraordinary. David watched in his mirror as the colonel walked toward the hospital, his shoulders a little straighter, his step a little steadier. Sometimes all it took was one person seeing you, really seeing you, to restore your faith in humanity. Marcus returned to his seat, but he couldn't focus on his upcoming business meeting. His mind kept replaying the morning's events, each memory making him cringe with shame. He thought about all the times he'd dismissed people based on their appearance, their economic status, their age. How many heroes had he overlooked? How many remarkable people had he treated as invisible? When the bus reached his stop, Marcus walked to the front and handed David a $100 bill. "For Colonel Thompson's future rides," he said simply. David nodded, understanding. "I'll make sure he knows." 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself sitting across from Colonel Thompson in a small cafe near the VA hospital. The colonel looked different, cleaner, his clothes newer. Marcus had quietly arranged for him to receive some assistance, not as charity, but as a small gesture of respect. "Tell me about Kafji," Marcus said, genuinely interested for the first time in hearing someone else's story instead of telling his own. Colonel Thompson's eyes grew distant as he remembered those terrible, heroic days. He spoke of young soldiers, barely out of high school, showing courage that humbled him. He talked about the weight of command, the burden of making decisions that determined who lived and who died. The hardest part, the colonel said, wasn't the enemy fire or the physical exhaustion. It was knowing that some of those boys wouldn't make it home, and that their families would get a folded flag instead of a living son. Marcus listened in silence, beginning to understand the depth of sacrifice he'd been too blind to see. This man had carried the weight of 200 lives on his shoulders and had somehow found the strength to save them all. "How do you do it?" Marcus asked. "How do you carry all that and still find it in yourself to be kind to someone who treated you terribly?" Colonel Thompson smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "Because anger is a luxury I can't afford. I've seen too much real evil in the world to waste energy on ignorance or fear. Most people aren't bad. They're just scared or confused or tired. The businessman on the bus wasn't evil. He was just a man who forgot that everyone has a story worth knowing." Their weekly coffee meetings became a ritual. Marcus found himself looking forward to them more than any business deal or social event. Through Colonel Thompson's stories, he began to see the world differently. He started noticing the homeless veteran on his corner, the tired single mother on his bus route, the elderly man who struggled with his groceries. Instead of irritation, he felt curiosity. What were their stories? What battles had they fought? What victories had gone unrecognized? Marcus began volunteering at the VA hospital, not for publicity or tax benefits, but because he wanted to understand the people he'd spent so long ignoring. He met nurses who worked double shifts to care for wounded warriors, families who'd sacrificed everything to support their loved ones, and veterans who found purpose in helping other veterans heal. 6 months after that morning on the bus, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at a veterans fundraising dinner. As the keynote speaker, he was expected to talk about success and business achievement. Instead, he told the story of meeting a true hero on a city bus. "I thought I knew what strength looked like," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "I thought it was about power, about never backing down, about always being right. But real strength is what I saw in Colonel Thompson's eyes that day. It's dignity in the face of humiliation. It's kindness despite cruelty. It's the quiet heroism of people who serve others without expecting recognition or reward." The audience, filled with veterans and their families, listened intently as Marcus shared his transformation. "That morning on the bus, I was the weak one. I was the one who couldn't handle a simple encounter with another human being without resorting to cruelty. Colonel Thompson showed me what real strength looks like, and it changed everything about how I see the world." As Marcus concluded his speech, he saw Colonel Thompson in the front row, wearing his dress uniform for the first time in years. The colonel stood and began to applaud, and soon the entire room was on its feet. Later that evening, as they shared a quiet moment, Colonel Thompson placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You know, that day on the bus was one of the hardest I'd had in years. I was going to the hospital because I'd been having some dark thoughts, wondering if anyone would care if I just disappeared. Your apology, your willingness to change, it reminded me that people can grow, that there's always hope for redemption." Marcus felt tears well up in his eyes. "I'm so glad you didn't give up. Sometimes we need to be broken down before we can be built back up," the colonel said. "Both of us learned something important that day. You learned to see people differently, and I learned that even in our darkest moments, grace can find us." The friendship between the successful businessman and the retired colonel became legendary in their community. They worked together on veteran support programs, homeless outreach initiatives, and educational projects designed to bridge the gap between military and civilian communities. David Rodriguez, the bus driver who had the courage to speak up, was honored by the city for his role in bringing attention to veteran issues. He used his moment of recognition to advocate for better treatment of all passengers, regardless of their circumstances. The story of that morning spread through social media, news outlets, and word of mouth. It became a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unappreciated. It showed that even the most ordinary encounters can become extraordinary when we choose to see past surface appearances to the humanity beneath. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the power of redemption. Marcus Webb's transformation from a cruel, judgmental businessman to a compassionate advocate proved that people can change, that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. Today, whenever someone mentions the incident on the bus, both Marcus and Colonel Thompson smile. Not because of the fame or recognition it brought them, but because of the friendship that grew from that moment of crisis. They learned that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about helping others stand up. Real success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give away. And the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields or in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when we choose compassion over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and love over fear. Their story reminds us that every person we meet is fighting battles we know nothing about, carrying burdens we can't see, and possessing strengths we might never recognize unless we take the time to truly look. It teaches us that heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear worn clothes and tired expressions, but their courage shines brightest when the world seems darkest. In a world that often feels divided by differences, their friendship stands as proof that common ground can be found in the most unexpected places, and that the bridge between strangers can be built with nothing more than mutual respect and the willingness to see each other as fully human. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, "I see you," to change everything. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of recognition to restore faith in humanity. And sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the simple act of treating another person with the dignity every human being deserves.